Good evening and welcome once again to the Bible Speaks Today from LBC Television Ministries here in today sunny Latonia. You'll notice if you watch these programs regularly, we're once again in what I laughingly refer to as the Sunshine Club studio, because our other studio is being worked up with, I don't know, blue cloth and green cloth. You know, if you understand about TV and green screens and blue screens, they're working on that, which means, I suppose, that probably next week I'll be able to show you some pictures instead of you having to sit and look at me all the time. Okay, we're continuing our series, if you like, Cities of the Bible. And by the way, before I go any further, if you've got a city or somewhere that you really like to know more about, then drop me a line. My email comes up on the screen from time to time if they remember in the control room. And what you can do is, if you have a city that you'd like to know something about, now let me tell you that Jericho, which we're doing for the next couple of weeks or so, is taken. Shechem is taken, and Bethel is taken. So anything other than that, you feel free to jump in there. The point I want to make is too that if you're thinking about a city, let's keep it to the cities, because we have very little information on the small hamlets. Now, if I can throw one out there, Capernaum, that would be a good one, because there's a lot going on in Capernaum even today. So, you know, and Caesarea, of course. Now, I'm not going to give you any more clues, but understand it's nothing where I can get research on. I picked up a couple of names out of the Bible to research, and found out that beyond saying, yeah, it's a city in the Bible, zip, that's it. And the other thing you should remember is although Jerusalem was a big city, and as we're going to learn today, Jericho also pretty big, some of the so-called cities in the Bible aren't very big at all by our standards today. And they're called cities in the Bible, and they're called cities in the literature of the time, but they're not necessarily big in the sense of, you know, I mean, Jerusalem was a big city, bigger today than it used to be. And in fact, if you remember when I was talking about the Crusaders' time, it wasn't really all that big. You know, several thousand people, that was all. That's just not really big, you know. Okay, so we're going to start with Jericho for the next few weeks. Now, just a bit of background for those of you who either don't follow the Bible, and if you're watching this and you're not following the Bible, then I'm very pleased you're watching this. Maybe it will encourage you to do just that, look at the Bible. But Jericho is obviously a city in Israel. It's actually on the Jordan River. It's on the West Bank. Now that should conjure up some images for you, because the West Bank features in the news, you know, quite often these days, unfortunately, I suppose. It is actually the administrative seat of the Jericho Governorate, because that's who rules it at the moment. It has a population between 19,000 and 22,000, depending, it fluctuates up and down. So it's relatively big. Jordan, the country of Jordan, actually occupied Jericho from about 1949 up until 1967, and you all know what happened there with the war, okay? And it's been held under Israeli occupation since, as I say, 1967. But in 94, I think, 94, 95, something like that, they handed it over to the Palestinian Authority. So now you have this interesting situation where you have Jericho on the West Bank, miles away from the rest of the Gaza and the other Palestinian Authority, which is on the coast. And they're linked by a road, and that's about it. It's a very odd situation. I don't really, this program is not a political seminar, and I don't want to go into who did what to whom. We're looking at Jericho. It was a city of the Bible, so what was it like then? And then we'll compare to what it was like now. Jericho's greatest claim to fame, other than being in the Bible, of course, is the fact that it's believed to be one of the oldest inhabited cities in the world. Not the oldest, the only one, but one of the oldest inhabited cities of the world. The archaeology that's been done there, and believe me, there has been a lot of archaeology done there, Even today, they're digging up all over Jericho, finding all sorts of amazing things. And there's a couple of books I'll recommend at the end of the series that you might want to look at. But archaeologists have unearthed the remains of, I think, oh, here it is, more than 20 successive settlements, buildings, areas. In other words, there've been this one, it's been knocked down, razed to the ground, another one, 20 times. Now remember, Jerusalem had a lot of ups and downs, but never completely destroyed. Jericho's been actually destroyed many times, totally. Okay. The very first one of these settlements, and I was amazed to find out that dates back 11,000 years, 9,000 years BC odd, something like that, BC. And interestingly enough, it's right at the beginning of the Holocene epoch of the Earth's history, which is one of those, you know, I don't forget what all the different, you know, ages of the Earth are, but Holocene is one of the more modern ones, but it's still a long way back, okay? And the reason it's being settled, of course, that in a land that is, you know, perpetually dry most of the time, there are numerous springs all around the city. So obviously it's attracted human habitation for thousands of years. You know, I mean, if you're a nomadic tribe wandering off the desert towards the coast, and you come up into the hills of what is now Israel, and you find water, hey, that's a good place to stop and stay. Water being a hard thing to find. Jericho in the Bible, you probably know this, but it is described as a city of palm trees. Anyway, another interesting thing about Jericho, of course, is the fact that it is located about 258 meters. That's what, 840 odd feet below the sea level, which is kind of an interesting. That's a long way down. That's a very long way down. It's below the sea level in an oasis in the Wadi Welt in the Jordan Valley. And to give you an idea of how fertile or how much water there is, there's a spring there called the Ain es-Sultan, which produces about 1,000 gallons of water a minute. Now think about that. Imagine 1,000 gallons, you know, that's a lot, a minute. That's a huge spring. And there's a huge aquifer under there. I mean, that spring irrigates some 10 square miles, like 250, 2,500 acres, something like that, through all these different multiple channels. And of course it feeds into the Jordan River, about 15 kilometers, 15 kilometers away. So you've got from Jericho downhill into the Jordan. So it's one of the what do they call them, tributaries of the Jordan, okay? Funnily enough, the annual rainfall in that area is only about 6.5 inches a year. Now, compare that to we get 2 inches in a weekend, you know. But I mean, it's mostly concentrated between November and February. So we get into nice little winter time, you know, where all the crops get planted and this sort of thing. And then the average temperature is about 59 in January. Wouldn't that be nice? Okay, so it's a fairly nice climate. 88 degrees Fahrenheit in August. So that's it's a comfortable range. So you can see why the ancient inhabitants wanted to live there, or stayed around there. You know, Jordan River's over there for fishing. You got water coming up, crops will grow, and as people started to become from hunters to hunter-gatherers, then obviously this area was well settled. And as each settlement came up and went down, and other people came in, somebody said, "Oh, this is a great place. Why don't we stop here?" That sort of thing. Okay. So the constant sunshine, the rich soil, and the abundant waters, of course, always made Jericho a very attractive place for a settlement. Now, Jericho's Hebrew name is Yeriho, Y-E-R-I-O, and it's thought to derive from the Canaanite word Ria, which means fragrant, which makes sense if you think about it. If you've got flowers and shrubs and that, it must smell nice. Although there is a theory, of course, as always with these discoveries, that it's derived from the word meaning moon, which is Yariah in Canaanite. So, you know, or possibly the name of the lunar deity Jericho, for whom the city was an early centre of worship. We'll come on to that later. Jericho's Arabic name, of course, you know, it's been in hands of both Israelis and Arabs. Jordan had it for a long time. Ariah means fragrant and comes from the same Canaanite word as Riyah, so it's probably more of a case for that than anything else. It's been disputed. I said at the beginning that Jericho was, you know, one of the oldest inhabited cities in the world, and it's been disputed, of course. And when they say continuously occupied, well, that's not strictly true either, because continuously occupied assumes that there's people living there the whole time. Okay, and we know from archaeological evidence that there were times when there weren't people there. It's also the oldest known walled city. Now that is important. Walled city in the world. So let's look at it in different regions, like we did with Jerusalem. Let's look at it in different time zones, shall we say. Let's talk about the ancient times, okay? So the Natufian hunter-gatherers, that's what the people were called back then, around 10,000 BCE, right, before Christ, okay? Jericho has evidence of settlements dating back that far. That is a very, very long time, even though we understand the Earth's been around a long time. Human history hasn't been around that long, okay? During the earlier days, as far as we can tell in the geographic history, there were great periods of cold and drought. You know, don't forget climates change over the centuries, and so a permanent habitation, basically in that area, was not really possible. It got too cold in the winter, but the spring, the big spring at Jericho, the one we just mentioned, was a popular camping ground for these hunter-gatherers groups. And they actually left microlith tools behind them, crescent-shaped tools, carved out of stone and that sort of thing, like the Stone Age type thing. Okay. And around 9600 BCE, now let me make a point here quickly. I know a lot of people get confused about this. BCE, before the Common Era, is the professional, accepted worldwide term for the period we call before Christ. All right, and we can use either. CE, Common Era, is after year zero, which is what we call after, we call AD, Anno Domini, and everyone else calls BC. So I'll use the BC terms because basically my research, when it comes across things like that, even the biblical research, does that. But around around 9600 BCE. Now, don't forget, we start out here at 10,000 and come down towards zero, not the other way around. So the droughts and the cold of that epoch, if you like, in history, came to an end and made it possible for these Natufian groups to extend the duration of their stay. Hey, didn't get so cold this year. Wow, let's stay a bit longer. Okay, or the land didn't dry up. So bit by bit over the centuries, okay, it eventually led to a year-round, hey, what's the point in moving? We've got everything we want here. And it became a permanent settlement. So what we call now the pre-pottery, the Neolithic age, so 9600 coming down, okay? They digging up at a place called Tel Es Sultan. Tel Es Sultan is like a hill, okay? It's called Sultan Hill, if you like. In Jericho, they started digging up around that, sometimes to dig modern buildings or to put roads in, this sort of thing. They found the foundations of the first permanent settlement on the site of Jericho. Okay, it was developed near the Ain es Sultan Spring. Okay, so hill, spring, okay, between about 10,000 and 9,000 BCE. Still a pretty long time ago. And as the world warmed up, now this is after the last ice age. Those of you who did geography in high school, and of course you all remember that, will remember about the ice ages. Okay, so after the world warmed up, and of course the Middle East warmed up first because the ice retreated north and south, all right? So the Middle East was getting warm while Europe was still clothed in ice, okay? But as it warmed up. There's kind of a new culture which is based on agriculture and permanent dwelling. I mean, if you're going to plant crops in the ground for food, then you're not going to move your house every 5 minutes because you want to stay and get what you have going. And of course the hunting was still going on, that sort of thing. But archaeologists called that the pre-pottery Neolithic age, abbreviated to PPNA, which I'm not going to use, okay? But those villages were characterized by small circular dwellings, okay? And they buried their dead under the floor, which is a bit, a bit odd, but okay, that's fine. But they used to bury their dead under the floor of the buildings, Now, I don't think these were probably buildings they lived in. It was probably the place where you bury the dead, But anyway, and we're talking about very small groups here, not huge numbers, okay? They relied on hunting wild game and the cultivation of wild and domestic, what we call cereals, rye and wheat and that sort of thing, okay? No use of pottery yet. So what they cooked them in, I guess stone containers, whatever, wooden, I don't know, maybe not, I don't know. But there was no use of pottery as we know it yet, okay? And at Jericho, as opposed to other parts of the world where you look at this sort of Stone Age Neolithic culture, the huts were built of clay and straw bricks. Now, if you look at Europe, the way they did their buildings there was mostly wattle, which is reeds bound together, tied in a bundle, stuck in the ground, and like a thatch roof. But here there were clay and straw bricks, because the straw bricks, of course, could dry in the sun, become hard, and they were plastered together with a mud mortar. Makes perfectly good sense. Each house, just to give an idea of how big they were, was about 16 feet across. So they're not very big, okay? And was roofed in brush, ferns, that sort of thing. It's covered in mud, so it made it fairly watertight. If you're in ex-military or Boy Scouts or one of those adventure people that go out and live on the land or do escape and evasion exercises, it's one of the things they teach you how to do, is how to build a shelter out of brush and mud and twigs and things like that. That's what these people are doing. They had hearths, fires inside the house. That means obviously it had a hole in the roof for it to go out. Okay, so about 9,400 BC, and we're still way, way away, right? There was it looks like there was about 70 modest dwellings, okay? Now, that puts the population, now I guess, I don't know how they do that, 3 people to a hut, 4 people to a hut. They didn't have very large families because I imagine the infant mortality was horrendous. But the estimates put the population as high as maybe 2,000 or as low as 200 or 300. Probably, I would say, 400 or 500 people, I mean, you got to understand that people didn't live very long there. 30 years old was considered old, aged. Infants died, mortality was awful. I mean, there were no protection against the sort of things that we have protection against then. But what's the striking thing about this is 9,600 years ago, the early town had a massive stone wall. Now, before you think, oh, so big deal. Okay, these are Neolithic, stone hammers, flints, this sort of thing, and they built a stone wall 12 feet high and 5 feet 11 wide at the base. Now, this is stones. Now, I'm not talking about stones, carved stones like Crusader castles. I'm talking about rocks, okay? So they laid a base 5.5 feet wide and then had enough intelligence to build it up like this so it could go to 12 feet. Now, you know as well as I do, if you're going to attack somebody, if you've got to climb a wall to get there, you think twice about it. Inside the wall, I can't impress on you how long ago this was. Inside that wall, there was a tower 12 feet high. So inside the wall, attached to the wall, was a tower 12 feet high, where it had an internal staircase with 22 steps. So it gives you an idea how high it was. Now, how do we know this? Because we found it, because they found it with the archaeologists. But that's not the point. The point is that the wall and the tower have no known precedent in human culture. Nowhere else, not in the wilds of ancient China or ancient Japan, ancient England or ancient America or anything. No one else has this. Now, I'm not saying that Jericho was, sort of the blessed spot on earth or anything, but it's just curious that Jericho, the oldest inhabited, started off by being the first defended village, if you will. Whoever those people were at that time, they had themselves switched on because they realized what was going. And it would have taken, they estimate, 100 men half a year to have built that. Now, it wasn't very big around because they only had 70 buildings, but 100 men working all the daylight hours, I guess bringing the rocks in from the mountain, building the tower. And it doesn't say, in a little bit of thing I researched on this, it doesn't say whether they were mortared together. Presumably they were with the mud mortar, so it's not like cemented wall, and I guess if you had a battering ram you could knock it down, but still pretty amazing. And here's the interesting thing. The wall may have been built as a defense against floodwaters, not as against attackers, and the tower for ceremonial purposes. So instinctively you think, and as I mentioned before, you think, oh, they built the wall to keep people away and the tower so they could see them coming. Maybe not. It was because it floods in that area. Or it did flood hundreds and thousands of years ago. It flooded there with the spring, and I imagine the Jordan River was a lot bigger than it is now. So to keep the floods out, they built a wall. So if you like, one of the first examples of urban construction, if you will. Okay? And here's the thing though, after about 300 or 400 years, the first settlement was abandoned completely. Everyone moved out. You've got to wonder why. It wasn't conquered. It wasn't a new band of people took over. They just walked away from it, as far as the archaeologists can tell. Maybe they got the plague, or maybe there was a better place down the road, or something like that. But there's no record of anybody. And the second settlement starts in 6,800. Now that's 300 years later. So for 300 years, nobody was there. Now, the claim by the people who say it's the oldest continuously inhabited place is that, oh, well, yeah, most people moved away, but there probably was one or two people, sheep herders or this sort of thing, still staying there. Because you say, well, where's the proof? Because the archaeological evidence at 9,600, the stone knives and things like that, is the same evidence at 6,600, same stone knives. So nothing much changed in that period of time. So how can you tell if anyone was there or not? Anyway, but the second settlement, the archaeological evidence seems to point to the work of invading people who absorbed the original inhabitants into their dominant culture. So maybe there were people there, they just moved in over a period of time, eventually became the kingpins, the leaders. We don't know. We don't even know who they were. Okay? I mean, artifacts from this period, this 6,000 period, they found a bunch of skulls, human skulls. And what's interestingly, they were plastered, had plaster put on them, and painted so as to reconstitute, if you will, the individuals that they were. So in other words, instead of making a bust of somebody, they put plaster on and tried to represent the people as they were in life. Again, archaeologists are divided. Either they were teraphim, the gods of that period of time, or the first example of portraiture in human history. Now, there may be some argument about that when you compare the cave dwellings in France and in England, places like that, which go back to 10,000 and beyond, but interesting. And go back again, I said that they were buried, people were buried under the floor, and it's thought they were kept in people's homes where the bodies were buried. Sort of a reminder, where's Dad? Well, that's what he looked like, and he's right there. Okay? I mean, I'm not being flippant, but, people felt like that. And a succession of settlements, different changes and things improving, this sort of thing, followed from about 4,500 BC onward, with the largest constructed in 2600 BC. Okay? So in 2600, Jericho was a fairly big, a city in the sense that we would understand it. Pretty big. Okay? Now Now we come to an interesting thing, and I'm going to finish on this and then pick it up next week. The program's called What the Bible Says Today, all right? And that's what we do. We look at the Bible and we take things from it and say what was happening, what it is, what actually happened there, and that sort of thing. And occasionally, as we did with the Jerusalem story, we found out that, in fact, far from being a Christian city for all these eons, Jerusalem was a pagan city for a lot longer than most people realize. And a lot longer than most people realize was the fact that the objects of our worship, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the Hill and all that sort of thing, weren't accessible for hundreds of years. So what you read about sometimes isn't always the way it happened. And sometimes Bible stories tend to reflect the ideas of the people who wrote them and not necessarily what actually happened. Okay? And we're going to come on to next week when we get back. We're going to be starting actually in the book of Joshua, of course, because it's Jericho, right? And I think some of you may have some of your ideas a little bit bruised, but I ask you to bear with me, okay? So, until next week, and in the meantime, read the book of Joshua this week. Read the book of Joshua so you know from whence we come when we come back next week, all right? Until then, good night. God bless.